And that's the way it is. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, this is part one of a two-part series of Bill Whittle Now, going off on the old Walter Cronkite sign-off on the CBS Evening News when he used to finish up by saying, and that's the way it is. In this first episode, we're going to take a look at essentially, what if it never gets any better than this? And what I mean is that the dominant news stories of our day, including the virus pandemic and the effect that it's having on the economy, or the effect that politicians are having on the economy as a result of the virus pandemic, the political situation in the country and the racial situation in the country. What happens, Bill, if the virus continues to roll on and the count goes higher and the economy must be increasingly constrained? What happens if Democrats take the Senate and Joe Biden takes the White House, and the street protests and the violence and the vandalism to the statues and the memorials continues? What I'm asking is, as somebody who thinks strategically, as many of our viewers do, what's plan B? What's the next phase of this process? Have we thought it through that far?
Wow, what a great series of questions. I don't think there's really a plan B because there's not a plan B because the situation is so fluid and constantly changing. Nobody saw the George Floyd thing coming. It was certainly prepared for in advance, but nobody really thought that would happen in the middle of this pandemic. And I don't think 2020 is done with us yet. So while I don't think there's exactly a plan B, I do think that there are some general rules that you would apply at this stage of the game to say, just in general terms, what we could do. To answer like the specific questions, let's just say that Biden wins the presidency and the Democrats take over the Senate. Bad news for the country, but the destruction of statues and the unlawfulness in the streets will end pretty much immediately.
And why is that?
Because they're being perpetuated in order to destabilize Donald Trump's presidency. It's the only chance they have.
So there's no legitimate outcry against the racial injustice in America and police brutality.
Of course there is.
Really just a political maneuver on the part of the left?
No. Of course there's legitimate protest against police brutality. But to give you an example of what I mean, and by the way, the pandemic goes into this same bag. If Biden and the Democrats win big in November, then the first Wednesday in November, the street violence will be a thing of the past, and so will the pandemic. And I can give you some evidence for this, and it's not trivial evidence. As far as the pandemic goes, when people like Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, and Gavin Newsom basically say, go out and protest this great injustice, take 100,000 people or whatever, stand shoulder to shoulder, most of them without masks, because this is important, it gives you an idea of how serious the pandemic actually is in terms of what the perceived threat is, especially to young people. If this was the kind of pandemic that we've been treating it as, if this was yellow fever, let's say, then there's no force on earth that could really cause a politician to say, go and do this. And furthermore, most people just simply wouldn't do it.
So you'd hear nothing but official cries for people to remain calm, stay indoors, stay away from mass gatherings.
If we were having the kind of pandemic that we're treating it as we did with, I keep coming back to yellow fever, because yellow fever and the influenza virus of 1919, both of these were serious, extremely deadly pandemics. And in cases like that, people don't need to be encouraged to stay indoors. They won't go outside for love or money. And so if the Democrats win big in November, the pandemic will have served its usefulness in terms of a political weapon to suppress the economy, put people out of jobs, get people restless and miserable, and so on. At that point, we'll start treating the pandemic seriously, but not hysterically. And so that's good news if you want to look at it that way. I would look at that
as this episode's not really focused on the good news. I guess your argument that you just made
it's catastrophic news.
It makes it sound like you're making the case for electing Joe Biden and a Democrat majority in Senate.
It's catastrophic news. I'm just trying to point out the immediate benefits of this catastrophic news. the other aspect, so basically, as I said, I think the street violence will essentially be reined in quickly and the pandemic will be treated seriously but not hysterically. Both of those things seem like good news, but Scott, it's catastrophic news. And the reason it's catastrophic news is because these two cynical, miserable, divisive, evil, lying strategies will have worked. The terrifying of the American people through the hysteria of the media regarding COVID-19. I'm not one of these people says it's a hoax, and not one of these people says it's trivial. I did the numbers. It's likely to be the third or fourth leading cause of death in 2020, and that's a significant number. But the hysteria around it is a weapon that's been, if we're going to postulate this case, it's a weapon that will have been used hysterically. Successfully is what I meant to say. And likewise, unrestrained street violence and rioting, destruction of statues, that will also be a successful strategy employed by the progressives. And if this strategy succeeds in November, then we know that while they will abate it as quickly as possible in order to regain some public trust and confidence, it can be deployed at any time. And what we've discovered with the Trump administration is that these tendrils of the deep state were so deep that as we begin to try to just uncover them, let alone remove them, what we would see in the case of a big Democratic win in November is that those tendrils would not only become deeper, they would become much more defended against the freak possibility that Democrats don't ever continue to win elections for the rest of time.
So I guess I'm still trying to get my hands on what it is that would be. I mean, it sounds to me like you're describing elect Joe Biden, the economy will start to resurge because government will lie in a different way than they've been lying.
I didn't say that the government would start to resurge. You said that.
No, the economy.
I said that. I'm sorry. I didn't say the economy would start to resurge. This is one of the many catastrophes. The economy certainly will not resurge. The economy will slow down even more. I said that the virus would stop being treated hysterically and that we'd start to see reigning in violence of the streets. I didn't say the economy would improve. The economy will continue to slow down. It'll slow down because Joe Biden's proposed $4 trillion in additional taxes. Much, if not all, of the Trump boom was a result of cutting taxes and producing some sense of certainty in the business community. That'll all go away. And for those people who say, no, the Democrats wouldn't want that. They don't want to. Yeah, they do. I'm not saying rank and file Democrats want that. Those people work for jobs. But the progressives in charge of the Democratic Party now, and it's been utterly taken over by progressives, understand that the more people who are out of work means the more people who are dependent on government largesse. And that means the more power that they have. And you can say to yourself, as I often did until I really finally just woke up and understood what was actually happening, you could say, yes, but that would impoverish the entire nation. It would reduce the nation eventually to third world status. Certainly that can't be the goal. They must know that. And then over the course of time, the evidence became so overwhelming that I came to the conclusion that, yes, these progressives know that. They don't care. As long as Gavin Newsom has his personal winery and he has his own estate and millions of dollars and travels from one place to another in a limousine, Gavin Newsom doesn't care if there are areas of San Francisco under his guidance when he was mayor that are impassable because of needles and human excrement on the streets. He doesn't care, because if he did care, he would do something about it. It is actually psychologically in the advantage of these progressives to have the rest of the country continue to decline economically, because as the living standard of the common people goes down, they maintain their position and therefore their ability to remain above the unwashed masses, which is the lifelong goal of people like this ever since there's been people. That will continue to increase. And then all you'll have to do in the America of 30 or 40 years of democratic rule from now is simply get a government job where you don't do anything, and it's going to come down to not what you know or what you can do, but who you know. Can you get a cushy administrative job that essentially does nothing and live well, while the rest of the hardworking people continue to live a poorer life in worse conditions because the taxes continue to get higher, the freedom gets lower, control of information becomes more and more extreme, and things like hate speech laws are put in place to do what George Orwell basically said was essential for a totalitarian state, and that is to control its thinking by controlling its language.
So you've kind of laid out what you think it will be like if it never gets any better than this, or at least in the short run doesn't get any better than this. Let me go back to my initial question, which is what should conservatives, the kind of people who are watching this program, what should they do? What is the strategy moving forward if everything plays out the way you've described?
Well, now we come to the good news at the end of the bad news. If the Democrats win big in November, things will get much worse. I think Donald Trump was a historical, looking back on it in terms of the likelihood of it and the forces arrayed against him, I think it was a miracle. Call it a fluke if you want to. They're not going to make that same mistake again. The Democrats are going to, we can clearly see they're doing everything they can. They're sending people out in the middle of a pandemic because protesting George Floyd, they perceive to be more damaging to Donald Trump than the actual pandemic is. So the short term, if they win, is going to be ugly, but the long term is good for conservatives. And the two things I would say in terms of what you should be doing is, first of all, find some peace. And I'm not saying be with your family in these final days. I'm just saying understand that politics may be all of their lives, but it's not all of our lives. And understand also that reality is on the side of conservatives because that's what conservatism is. Modern conservatism is the acceptance of reality, and reality will not be cheated. Reality can be put off, but reality will not be denied. There will come a time when this system, which is already, the progressive system is already devouring itself. It's all, the children of the revolution are already being eaten by the grandchildren of the revolution. We're seeing it in front of us all the time. We talked, I guess it was yesterday, about a bunch of very liberal actors who now suddenly feel quite disposed because they're being called white supremacists all of a sudden when they're good, solid liberals and they're down with the Black Lives Matter program.
So step one, you would say, is just kind of settle down. It's going to be okay. Not everything is as political as they make it out to be. What would be step two? Things you can do?
Step one would be that reality will not be denied, and we're on the side of reality. The second thing that I would say that we could do is simply this. This would be the first time in history, if they pull off a big win, that the tyrants attempted to control a population when the population had the weapons and not the tyranny. So you can treat that advice accordingly. But if you don't think that's what's kept us afloat for this last 40 or 50 years, you can take my word for it. This situation would be far worse if the government didn't fear the American people, and they fear them because of weapons, and they fear them because of weapons like the AR-15. So that aspect of it is something I would certainly consider. And then finally, the thing to understand is that while the Democrats, let me just rephrase that, progressives is a much better term. The progressives have taken control of all of the major organs of a second wave economy, of an industrial era economy, which is the economy people my age, I just turned 61, people born in the 50s and 60s, grew up in the end of the industrial era in America. And so all of the things that people my age are used to, growing up with 3 networks on TV, there were 4 car makers, everything was centralized, everything was top down. As you said in the opening, and that's the way it is, Walter Cronkite is speaking to probably a third of the nation. And that's because you had a choice of him or 2 others, and Walter seemed the friendliest. But those days have gone. And what's the reason that my long-term outlook is not so pessimistic is because as we enter the information age, we're well into it now. Let's just say the introduction of the internet as a commercial mechanism, mid to late 90s. At that point, from that point forward, the progressives have been doomed in the long term. And they've been
Bill,
doomed
I'd like to
because
leave this as a cliffhanger right now, because the next episode we do is going to directly address that issue, and I'd like people to stick around for that. Ladies and gentlemen,
let me close it with then they'll be doomed in the long term.
Ladies and gentlemen, members at BillWhittle.com have made it possible for us to create these programs some 20 times a month, plus 20 episodes of Right Angle with Stephen Green, Bill Whittle, and myself. Those include episodes that only members get to see, because they're backstage episodes and they're so-called behind the paywall, as they say in the business. If you'd like to get behind that veil, just go to BillWhittle.com and click the big green Become a Member button. This is part one, as I mentioned. We will provide a link ultimately to part two, and then from part two back to part one, so you can make sure to watch both of them. I'm not sure if it's going to matter the sequence, but we'll see. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.